5 years ago, on this day, October 16th, my dad passed away through cancer. Today, I want to have a conversation about something that I know is very awkward, right? Maybe you even felt it as soon as I brought it up. When we think of death, we'll often think of loved ones, or we'll think of ourselves and our own mortality. Because there's two things that we all have in common. We're all alive, and we're all going to die. And it's kind of awkward to talk about. Uncomfortable, right? Even being up here, talking about this, it's a little uncomfortable. But it's an important conversation to have. And I want to share some of my grief journey with you, because it kind of coincides actually with my journey in Toastmasters. So I'll give you kind of the backstory on all of that. I joined Toastmasters right after college, December 2013, with my sister and one of my best friends. A lot of you are actually remember that, right? Remember us walking in, these three young people, and we're all like, whoa, there's all these old people here, and they just really want us, and it was kind of weird. But we stuck with it, and it ended up working out really well, at least for me. Anyway, about 2 months after joining in February, I found out that my dad had cancer. And so, right as I was learning to integrate and be a part of this club and starting to give speeches, I was also finding out that my dad was going through a really hard time, and I was having to navigate that. And it was challenging because while I was processing all that emotionally, I was coming to these meetings and hearing stories and giving speeches, and there was a part of me that really wanted to tell everyone, like, hey, this is what I'm going through. But I was also scared to bring up something like that, right? It's a very heavy topic, and I'm like, people don't really want to hear about this. This is really uncomfortable. These meetings are so fun and light. Do I want to be that person that sort of drags everybody down? So I kind of just kept it to myself. Fast forward a few months, in the summer, I actually started competing in a speech contest. Some of you remember we used to have a humorous speech contest, and I was challenged to do it. And I ended up doing the speech contest and actually won the round here and went on to the next round and actually won that round as well. And it was a pretty funny speech, but it was challenging because while I was even preparing for the speech and doing the speech, I didn't feel funny, right? Because in the backdrop, there's what's going on at home. So it was really hard to live that simultaneously. Anyways, it got to the point where I had reached the division level of the speech contest, and it got to be too much because my dad's health was quickly deteriorating. And I ended up taking a break from Toastmasters. I don't think I even said why. I just said I'm going through something pretty personal, sent an email, and I took a break. Anyways, like I said, my dad passed away in October, and I think I joined Toastmasters again months later, back in the spring. I ended up coming back. And I knew I wanted to go back. I was missing it. I loved Toastmasters. It was something that my sister wasn't really for her. My friend here, getting busy with work, it wasn't really for him, but I still found myself sticking through that. And I knew I wanted to come back and be a part of the club, but I was really nervous because I knew if I come back, I'm gonna have to share about what happened. And that was scary. To be vulnerable and share that with everyone. But I did. I ended up being super happy that I came back. I think first day I remember coming back and I did table topics and I won. And everyone was super happy to have me back and felt really good. And I think it was the next week or when I gave my next speech, I shared what happened and cried, and it felt really good actually. But it's interesting in the midst of all that, because really what I want to talk about is grief, right? And I learned that when my dad passed away that we as a society and as a culture really struggle when it comes to talking about grief. And it's really awkward and people don't really know how to navigate it. I remember a lot of conversations I had with loved ones, awkward conversations of people coming up and saying things like, hey, let me know if there's anything I can do. I heard things like, Robert, everything happens for a reason. Things like, he's in a better place now, right? Things that, while well-intentioned, made me feel worse, not better. And I learned that the best way to not deal with that is to not talk about it. And my goal was to get over grief as quickly as I could, right? In my mind, I was like, the best way to do this is to try to get back to a sense of normal, right? And it was tough too, because I just graduated from college, and while my dad was going through all that, I was at home. So I wasn't working, and I'm like, shoot, I gotta get my life together. I'm broke right now, I gotta start working. So I immediately tried to just jump into work And it's so funny, right? Like, looking back on it, we can see things in hindsight, but in the moment, I was like, I'm doing good. I feel pretty good. I'm dealing with this in a healthy way. I'm going to focus on productive things. I'm going to be positive. And I fell into this trap of positive thinking, right? And I know it's really toted in our society, like, oh, just be positive. If you really focus on what you can control, then you can overcome things. And I was like, I'm going to focus on being positive, on the positive things. I'm not going to let these negative things weigh me down. And I really focused on trying to do good in work and went after positions that, in hindsight, one, I didn't really have the technical skills for yet, and I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to really do well in these jobs. And so it was a series of sort of like struggling and then feeling bad about myself while not really processing what I had just gone through, right? So it was a really interesting time in terms of navigating that grief. And again, I felt like I was doing pretty good with all of this, right? Because I would sort of look around, and we all have this idea, I think, in our mind of how long it should take for us to sort of get through grief. Like, no one really wants to say it, but there's sort of this unwritten thing of like, hey, you know, we understand that you went through this traumatic thing, right? Have this season of grief, but, you know, after a few months, you should be kind of back to normal, right? And I sort of had that perception too. Like, I didn't want to be that guy going out with friends 6 months down the road, being all down, being like, oh man, guys, I'm just not feeling very cool right now, right? Like, no one wants to be that person. I didn't want to be a downer. So again, I wanted to focus on being positive, right? But again, by just focusing on the positive things, all I was doing was burying those negative emotions. And it's interesting when you think about it, the further down you end up burying those emotions, right? Think of like a volcano, right? The harder it forms, and then slowly when it rises to the surface, it's going to explode. Right? So it's so important to deal with our emotions in real time. But I was really focused on just wanting to fix everything and get back to this state of normalcy, right? And I've learned over the years, and Toastmasters has been super helpful with that sharing our story and actually talking about grief is super helpful. And actually being a part of Toastmasters for me has been super therapeutic. I haven't started going to therapy until recently. I think Toastmasters was kind of my therapy before. Anyways, it was interesting because about 2 years after he passed, I ended up getting into another speech contest in the spring, and this one was the international speech contest. And it was a super amazing time, mainly because going through that, I felt such an overwhelming amount of support. It was amazing through that journey. And I know that I wouldn't have gone as far as I did without the support that I got. So I'm super grateful for that. Anyways, it was interesting, right? So I'm talking about what my experience was like in Toastmasters specifically. And I remember because as I was trying to get back to the state of normalcy and just get over grief, I remember coming to meetings, and I'm going to talk about Deb a little bit. She would speak quite often about her grief, and it made me uncomfortable at first, right? Like the first time I heard it, I'm like, oh, Deb, I really resonate with that. And then the second time, I was like, cool, that's cool. And then the third time, and the fourth time, and I was like, man, Deb needs to kind of get over her grief. She just keeps talking about it. I don't understand, like, that's not very healthy, right? She should kind of move on. And then I was like, over the years, I just realized, whoa, like, I had to take a step back from that and be like, no, the person who's uncomfortable is like me with that, because she's talking about something that's very real that I didn't really want to deal with. And I felt awkward having to think about that in that space. So I was like, oh, she's talking about this. This is making me think about grief. This is maybe having other people think about what happened to me. It kind of sucks. I don't want to think about that. I just want to be positive, right? But it turns out just being positive is actually stupid, right? Like, to put it bluntly, it's just kind of bullshit. The whole positiveness. What happens when we just focus on being positive, it's just like we're not dealing with what's real. And in truth, we have to deal with that pain. And it's okay to deal with that pain, right? We feel that pain because we love people and we lose them. And that's okay. And we have to learn to navigate that. And I've learned that grief I often think of it as like two polarizing things. When you think of grief, it's either you're just super sad all the time and depressed, or you should just be super happy, get over it, and live a fabulous life. But it's not really true. There's like this wide space in the middle for you to like navigate and learn how to deal with that. So I've been super blessed to be a part of this club. I want to respect the time. But I just want to let you all know, right? Maybe this has brought up memories for you about loved ones, about your own mortality. I want you to know that it's okay, that you're not okay. Woohoo!